Hey, welcome back. I don't know if any of you has been actually following the story in Somalia, but it's actually quite very interesting what is taking place there. Somalia is a country that has had instability for over 30 years, for over roughly like 25 years now. Um, you understand that Uganda is very, very heavily involved in this country, Somalia, whereby we are the biggest contributors of the AMISOM troops, that is the Union, African Union mission in Somalia, troops that are financed by the Americans. And Museveni has benefited a lot from this venture, whereby he has earned a lot of arms, weapons, money, and all this kind of thing. But what is interesting is that something happened recently, I think yesterday, no, earlier this year. The president, known as Muhammad Abdullahi, also known as Faramaajo, his term of office had actually ended, and he was expected to call for elections. Unfortunately, he did not call for elections, but what they did was he extended his term of office for more 2 years, claiming that he was preparing for direct elections. Now, when he did that, what is interesting is the people of Somalia rose up, the opposition and different militants and clan leaders, and they went to the streets and started protesting. All of a sudden, Faramajo, rethought about his decision, and he said, "You know what? I think we should have the elections in 2 weeks' time." So, so now he's likely to call on the elections. But when I saw the story, it was actually interesting, and I said that I should share with you and maybe give you my thoughts on the situation in Somalia, because Uganda has been really, really heavily involved in this particular country. So I'll look at two articles. One is from DW, VW, and then the other one is from Al Jazeera. So the one in DW says that, just a minute, the one in DW says that Somali president calls for elections amid unrest. The president had agreed not to extend his term in an overnight speech. The country's prime minister had signaled his opposition to the president's plan to extend his mandate. Some residents have started fleeing Mogadishu. Now, Somali President Muhammad Abdullahi Mohammed called for elections on Wednesday and agreed not to extend his presidential term by 2 years. Quote, as we have repeatedly stated, we have always been ready to implement timely and peaceful elections in the country, Mohammed said in a Wednesday morning speech on state television. But unfortunately, our efforts were hampered by individuals and foreign entities who have no aim other than to destabilize the country and take it back to the era of division and destruction in order to create a constitutional vacuum, added the president. Muhammad, also known as Faramajo, lost more allies on Tuesday in his bid to stay in power. Muhammad had signed a law extending his mandate by 2 years, provoking political violence in the capital Mogadishu. But Galmadog and Hashabel, two Somali states that were formally aligned with the president, called for the cancellation of the term extension and resuming talks on the national election in a joint statement on Tuesday. Later in the day, the Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Rabo supported Galmadog and Hashabel's appeal and called for preparations for the new elections. So what is the situation in Mogadishu? Residents began fleeing their homes on Tuesday, fearing more clashes over Muhammad's move. Civilians piled televisions, televisions and mattresses in two rickshaws, unloaded belongings on two donkeys, according to the AFP news agency. On Sunday, groups of armed men opposing the president exchanged fire with security forces. Government troops have blocked major roads as armed opposition held positions in parts of the capital. So what fueled the tensions? In February, Somali's election was delayed amid disputes between the federal government and the states of Puntland and Jubaland on how to conduct the vote. Now, earlier this month, the lower house of parliament voted to extend President Mohammadi's four-year term in office. However, the Senate rejected the move. The president tried to defend his actions in a recent interview with the local newspaper, the Buffalo News, saying Somalia cannot afford the power vacuum. Who can lead if we leave? He asked. What does the unrest mean for Somalia? The move sparkled threats of sanctions from the US and EU. The latest violence threatens Somalia's security, undergoing fragile gains made over the past decade and a half, said the International Crisis Group, a think tank. Somalia has not had an effective central government since the collapse of Barre's military regime in 1991, which led to decades of civil war and lawlessness fueled by clan conflicts. The country also still battles Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda-linked Islamist group. Al-Shabaab controlled the capital until African Union troops pushed it out in 2011. Now, later, this is a day later, Somali lawmakers reversed the decision and they overwhelmingly voted for the country to hold indirect elections. Now, for me, my understanding of the situation in Somalia is really interesting because this is the problem with Africa, whereby leaders take power, afterwards they become power hungry. Surely, Faramaajo, after 4 years, he should have held the elections, and then Somalia would have continued like his predecessor. He also handed over to Faramaajo. Now, Faramaajo should also go into the elections, and if it is not voted, he leaves. Why is it so hard for African leaders to leave power? You see, this is the problem with Africa that I always tell people, that however much you develop Somalia, however much you build roads and improve technology and do all these sorts of things, and you do not solve the political issues in Somalia, everything that you have built and everything you have constructed and the economy you have grown for all the peace you have brought for the past 30 years, it's not going to last. That is it. It is not going to last. For as long as African countries do not solve political issues and how to govern themselves, everything that we do in terms of politics, in terms of all these kind of things, it's not going to work. It will only work for a short time, but when it breaks down, it will break down and set you back like another 100 years. I mean, this is not rocket science. Surely, Faramaajo has been in power for 4 years, right? And just as when his term has ended, he says, you know what, guys, I think the way we vote is not good. Because look here, I came through, indirect elections, and I think we should now do via direct elections, whereby there is a one-man, one-vote system, because that has never happened in Somalia. So now he's like, oh, I think we should change the way we vote. Putting away the system that brought him in power, and now he wants to be voted under a different system. Now, no one is going to accept that, definitely. Of course, that was a catastrophe and a recipe for disaster. You can't say that Somalia, I mean, a country that has been ravaged by war and political instability for all this time, and a country that has been fragile for all this time to make such a decision in one way or the other. I mean, after 4 years, how many years does Faramaajo need to actually be satisfied with power in the country? Now, the things that are happening in Somalia, they are not unique from other African countries that have power-hungry dictators or power-hungry autocrats and tyrants and so-called presidents. The same thing happened in Chad. The same thing happened here in Uganda. I will give you an example. Museveni we had two things in terms of our Ugandan constitution that would limit the power of the presidency and would also limit the years or the number of years that the president would actually spend in power in order to avoid people entrenching themselves in power. For example, in our 1995 constitution, we had an article that said, the president is not supposed to exceed 3 terms because each term in Uganda is 5 years. Now, the first elections we had in Uganda were in 1986, right? And towards 2006, I think it was 2006, Museveni removed the term limits, right? And said, no, anyone can have as many terms as possible. So like in the US, they have like 2 terms for every president, right? You cannot exceed 2 terms. Now, in Uganda, we had, that issue of term limits where someone could not exceed 2 terms. So what Museveni did, he scrubbed the term limits at first. And Ugandans were like, okay, fine, okay, you have done it, we have protested, you have refused, no problem. You know what he did? Now, the only hurdle that was left was the age limit. Now, in the Ugandan constitution, it said that the president is not supposed to exceed 75 years old. Now, towards the 2016 election, was it 2016? No, after the 2016 election, I think that was Article 102B. After the 2016 election, Museveni was not eligible to run against Bobi Wine in 2021. You know what he did? All of a sudden, issues arose in the country. Conspiracy arose about the president's age, because the public had a different age, because he was a president that never wanted to tell his age. The public was told a different age, and Museveni, when the issue of age limit came about, because he was not eligible to run in 2021, all of a sudden he corrupted some religious leaders and he changed his age. And then they brought photographers. They came and they even pointed, oh, look, the president was born in this year, after editing the birth registry, where he was baptized from, right? Now, there is a lot of controversy on that issue, and you can go and look it up. But these were all mechanisms on how the gentleman could entrench himself in power. Now, by creating that, of course, it made him unpopular. For over 35 years, the country has not seen a different leader. And that is where it led to. So Faramaajo's manipulation of the parliament and refusing, the Senate had voted against his actions, like of extending his term to 2 years. The Senate had voted against it, but he refused. Right? So I think there is a disease on the continent. COVID-19 is not the only disease that we have on the continent, but our leaders are the ones that are being affected by this disease of being corrupted by power, of thinking that they are the only wise people that are supposed to rule a country. You find a leader taking over a country and is like, I'm the only wise person in this country who is supposed to rule you. If I'm not around, no one else can rule you, or the country is going to fall apart. That's what Faramaajo is also saying. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. After Faramaajo taking power, he came and visited Museveni. So him and Museveni, they are good counterparts. They are good buddies. So they know themselves on how they eat the money of AMISOM and all this kind of thing. Because Museveni knows that if at all Somalia dives into another crisis, he should be on guard in order to go and intervene. And by intervening, it means that the US will have to keep up with him. Now, if this scheme, or if it is Museveni that gave Faramaajo advice in order to extend this thing, well, that is really interesting. And it wouldn't come as a surprise to me that Museveni must have given this gentleman, Muhammad Abdullah Muhammad, some advice to extend the term limits in order to create a crisis in the countries whereby Museveni would come in as a savior. I mean, how could you do that? It doesn't make sense. Surely, to me, it doesn't make sense. I have some Somali friends who watch me on this platform, but they can tell me what you think. But the fact that people would like to always shift the goalposts in order to suit them, I don't think that is really fair in terms of leadership. Because even if the 2 years would have elapsed, still Faramaajo would have come up with something. Now, according to Al Jazeera, they said that Somali lawmakers vote for the country to hold indirect elections. The parliament speaker says 140 MPs backed the return to the September agreement that will allow for indirect presidential and parliamentary elections. Now, it says, Somali's lower house of parliament has voted anonymously to restore an agreement reached last year that will allow the country to hold indirect elections. Last month, the parliament had voted to extend President Muhammad Abdullah Muhammad's term, also known as Faramaajo, by 2 years, and for the country to hold its future polls under a one-person, one-system vote. Now, the move, however, was rejected by the Senate, Prime Minister, opposition leaders, and 4 of the country's 6 federal member states, leading to a standoff in the capital, Mogadishu. On Saturday, I really don't know how Faramaajo expected to get away with this. I mean, the Prime Minister, the Senate, the opposition leaders, and 6 federal member states, 4 out of the 6 federal member states had opposed this entire thing. And he continued to go on with it. On Saturday, the Speaker, Mohamed Musal, said 140 MPs had voted to reinstate the indirect polls, where special delegates chosen by Somali clan leaders pick lawmakers who in turn choose the president. Now, based on the September 2020 agreement, with no lawmakers expressing any rejection. In an address to the parliament shortly after the vote, Mohammed, who is popularly known as Faramaajo, called on lawmakers to back the return to the agreement. So, after a bit of pressure from the international community and seeing that he was really becoming unpopular with the move, he told the lawmakers, "Look here, guys. I think we have to reverse this. It was really, really a bad move, and I did not support it in the very first beginning." He also said, because push had come to shove anyway, he also said that he had directed the Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Robo to spearhead the process of preparations and implementation of the electoral process, including key elections, including key election security arrangements to ensure elections take in a peaceful and stable atmosphere. I also, quote, I also ask the opposition leaders to play their role in pacifying the country and Mogadishu in particular, for the sake of the people, country, and religion, the president said. In a speech following the vote in the lower house of parliament, Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein ordered the army to return to the barracks and urged politicians to avoid inciting violence. Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb, reporting from Nairobi, Kenya, said the move today on part of parliament is certainly, quote, is certainly expected to de-escalate the tension that we have seen recently in Mogadishu. Though key challenges remained, a lot of opposition believes that Faramaajo won't agree to the terms of any election that doesn't favor him. Between 60,000 and 100,000 people were forced to flee their homes following clashes on Sunday that stirred fears all-out war between heavily armed factions for and against the president. At the heart of the current crisis facing the country is Faramaajo's failure to hold parliamentary and presidential elections before his term expired in February. Faramaajo and the federal states agreed in September to hold indirect elections before the February 8th deadline. Somalia has not held any direct one-person, one-vote elections since 1969. Repeat efforts to organize one have been scuttled by security problems or lack of political will. The indirect model has been used before. This time round, it was to go in further terms of inclusivity with double the polling locations and almost twice as many delegates voting as the election in 2017. But it never got off the ground, with hostilities between Faramaajo and leaders of Puntland and Jubaland derailing the plan. The two key states accused Faramaajo of stacking all important electoral committees at a state and federal level with loyalists. The central government rejected their alternatives, with no side agreeing on who would provide security on the voting day. Elmi, a professor of studies, blah, 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 blah. All right, so you can go and read this article. But what is interesting to me is this. Now, with what Faramaajo did, it has already sowed some seeds of discontent in Somalia. And what that means is that even if they hold these elections in the 2 weeks' time, because now Faramaajo has shortened the elections from 2 years to 2 weeks. What a drastic change. I mean, Somalis really you guys are really great. I mean, because where you were heading to, it was going to become into an authoritarian regime. Anyway, Faramaajo was clearly leading into becoming a tyrant, and he's a friend of Museveni. They are really good friends. Now, what he has done here is that he has sowed seeds of discontent, because even if the elections are being held now, even if they're going to be held, and he turns out to be the winner, well, allegations of corruption, allegations of election rigging, and all this kind of thing are going to surface. And the people of Somalia will most likely call for him to, to either not take part in the election or something of that sort. But this is really interesting to me that, things in Somalia are happening in this way. But I wouldn't be surprised if at all Museveni has something to do with this somewhere there. I believe Museveni has something to do with either Faramaajo by giving him advice so that he can still get the paycheck and doing some sort of sneaky games in one way or the other. Because look here, there is no person in the Great Lakes region who has chewed money or who has eaten money on the backs of on the premise of war, or on the premise of fighting war on terror, or on the premise of fighting Islamicists, as well as on the premise of fighting terrorism. Because Museveni is one of those presidents who understood the art of manipulating Western donors by capitalizing on things they fear most. Things like terrorism, Islamists, warlords, health, and all this kind of thing. So he understands through his lobbyists on how to work these situations out. And what is happening in Somalia today, I'm not surprised that he has something to deal with it somewhere. Because look here, the truth of the matter is Museveni and his cabal have been sidelined in Somalia. That is why you see that the US is now putting so much money, and all these donors, they are actually putting more money in Kenya in order for Kenya to take the lead in the region, which is really interesting because Ethiopia, which we would also have expected it to be, a wee bit stable, has also fallen into a crisis with the situation that is happening, in the Tigray region, and the president, Abiy Ahmed. So all of a sudden now Kenya is the only country that they are looking at. Because if you look here, if you look and see that, okay, Uganda, Museveni, 35 years old, unpopular, just killed people last year. How would we take him, or how would we front him as the peacemaker in Somalia? Okay, now Kenya is having an election, I think next year. No, this year, I think, late this year. I'm not sure. You don't quote me on that. But between either this year or early next year, they're having an election. Now, the way that election turns out in Kenya, it will mean a lot for the region, because Kenya is the only country now that we are left to watch on how its election will turn out, because it seems that election is one of the hardest things for dictators to hold, and one of the things that most of the leaders in Africa, most of the dictators and most of these so-called presidents in Africa fear the most. Because for some reason, these people don't want to leave power. Why is it so hard? How much money? How much time? How much? Because even if you get Museveni, even if you get these so-called dictators and tell them, okay, look here, how much time do you want for you to stay in power? They would, if they had an option or if they had a right, they would even ask for them to be, for them to still be president, or to rule or govern these countries, African nations, while they are still in their graves. It is really sad. All right, we wish peace for Somalia, and we wish everything gets back to normal, and we don't wish Somalia to end up in a situation that Uganda is in today. Please, Faramaajo, respect the rule of the people. We understand that you are friends with Museveni, but for the sake of Somalia, for the sake of your country, do the right thing. All right, thank you very much. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we shall be bringing you more episodes on what is happening in Uganda as well as the continent. Thank you.